Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, and anything else that catches our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I'm joined as always by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing fine. I really like the cooler weather.
It's really nice. We've had summer was a little bit brutal, and now maybe this is kind of the payoff for it. We're having so far, knock on whatever, a really beautiful October.
Yes,
just delightful.
Yes. So far, it's been everything you want an October to be.
Yeah. Well,
it's early yet, though. Things can go south in a hurry.
Well, south or whatever direction. I mean, I'm thinking like we're still going to have like another spate of 90-degree days or something before Halloween. I guess we will see. Anyway, we're not here to talk about the weather. We are here to talk about what happened this past week. We had a fair number of interesting events. Our interview this week is going to be with Jim Snowden, the Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works for Knox County, and we will be getting an update from him about the Advance Knox planning process, which is going on right now, and among other things, you will hear how you can provide input into that if you have not already. Some professors at the University of Tennessee this past week had sort of a teach-in, kind of an academic protest pushing at the boundaries of a new state law about divisive concepts. We will talk about that. The Knox County School Board had a couple of interesting votes this week that showed some things about the new alignment of that board. And to start us all off, we'll go to another local institution that has also had some changes in leadership recently, the Knoxville Police Department. Scott, what happened there?
Well, the police department has been has been reorganized. The Chief Noel, after 3 months on the job, has decided to reorganize the department in many ways. They announced it Monday at a ceremony where they promoted 20 officers to various positions. Now, the overarching framework is still going to be the same. The 3 deputy chiefs over 3 divisions, although they're going to call them bureaus now. And 2 of the deputy chiefs were among the people who were promoted, and that's Susan Coker and David Powell.
Because there were a bunch of vacancies.
There were two vacancies from deputy chiefs who left amid various investigations. Not one of him, and one that he was just kind of a
participant.
He wasn't the target of the investigation, but he was kind of caught up in it. But anyway, and they've shuffled some things around. One of the things that Noel did was he reassigned every single captain, which is the next rank down. Every single captain in the department has a new role. And he said he did that to give everybody a fresh start and also get people more experience in other areas of KPD, because one of his stated goals is to train his successor at some point down the road, and he wants a good pool of people to who have experience all across KPD and not just in one area. And
that also seems like a somewhat, I don't know if gentle is the right word, but diplomatic way to assert his own authority. I mean, if you come in at the head of an organization like that and you have people in your sort of first or second layer of supervisors who have a position that they've been in for a long time, that they were maybe promoted to by a previous chief, they don't owe that position to you as the chief. And so by sort of like reassigning everybody, he's also like, all of them now have jobs that they were given by him, right?
That's true. That's true. That's kind of one of those, internal politics things that goes on in just about any organization. But one of the where the reorganization really takes effect is what used to be called the Patrol Division. Now it's going to be called Field Operations. And in that area, what they did was KPD has been since the 90s, basically has had two districts, east and west, divided by I-275 and 75. And that's kind of how the patrols went. And then what Noel has done is he's created three divisions. There's an east and a west, but there's also one called Central, which is downtown, the old city, the UT area, Fort Sanders, and South Knoxville. And so there are three smaller areas that these, and there are going to be three captains overseeing those, and they're getting a lot more responsibility. Up until now, it's primarily been just the captains have been in charge of just patrol, who goes where in their cars, when they go there. Now they decentralize some functions, and there are going to be many things that the district captains are responsible for instead of the central office, the central administrative office. So, and one of those things, for instance, is community outreach. He wants the captains in each of those districts to be the face of KPD for the people who live in those districts. And they're going to be responsible for things like setting up community meetings and things like that. And they can be different. And he's given them flexibility too. He says they're going to be different in different parts of the city, perhaps. For example, West Knoxville has some pretty strong neighborhood organizations, and that's where probably a lot of the outreach will happen. The East District is a little different. The parts of the East District have real strong neighborhood organizations, Fountain City, Town Hall East, and Holston Hills. But in especially the predominantly African American neighborhoods, it's the churches. So in the East District commander may end up spending a lot of time with outreach to churches. The Central District command is going to be a little different because there's students, there's downtown business leaders and things like that. So, but they will each have the flexibility to provide the community outreach tailored to their own areas. So it's he's putting a lot more responsibility down on those three captains.
Well, and I know from my time working at the city, there was always discussion about downtown in particular, because of course downtown, over the last 20 years has really mushroomed and has become not just a residential center in a way it never was before, but returning to being a commercial center, an entertainment center, really for the whole region. And I remember sitting around the table with some discussions about why can't we get more officers downtown. There was a perception by some people in that administration that, with all of the people and all of the focus and investment in and around the downtown area, that there needed sometimes to be more visible police presence. And the response to that often was, well, KPD officers have to cover a wide territory. And so it seems like breaking it up this way is giving a little more dedicated focus, however many staff or officers are assigned there, to that really central area.
Yeah, and you got to remember too that Noel is real big on analytics. He's a real data-driven leader, and so not only will the district captain will have responsibility for it, but it's also going to be based on where the calls of service come from, and where the problems are, and based on the data that they collect. So yeah, it could very well may be that they have that captain provides more resources downtown, but it's up to that captain, and that captain's going to be held responsible for it.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. If they don't produce the results, then maybe they'll get reassigned next time there's a reassignment.
All right. Well, interesting to watch our new chief settling in and kind of setting his own course a little bit.
Yeah, he's putting his stamp on the department now.
Well, speaking of putting a stamp, the Knox County School Board had an interesting meeting this past week. We have essentially a new school board now. First of all, there are 3 out of the 9 members were just sworn in on September 1st. So that's a third of the board is actually new. But the other thing, of course, that's happened is we went through this past election cycle where we had partisan school board races for the first time in about 20 years. And now we really have a partisan school board in a way that we did not have a year ago. We have essentially a 5-member Republican majority out of the 9 members on the board. 3 of those were elected as Republicans in this past round, and that's Board Chair Christy Christie, Vice Chair Betsy Henderson, and new board member Steve Triplett. And then you have Susan Horn and Mike McMillan, who were elected in nonpartisan races the last time they ran, but both of them are well known as Republicans. Right. I mean, Mike McMillan served as a Republican on county commission before he was on school board. Susan Horn has said, yes, I'm a Republican. I mean, she represents Farragut. Yes, she's a Republican. Yes. And so, I think one of the questions has been, what's this going to mean? So then on the kind of the other side of that equation, we have 2 board members who were elected as Democrats this past year, this past cycle, Reverend John Butler and Catherine Bike, and then Daniel Watson and Jennifer Owen, who were also elected in nonpartisan races but have not identified, they say they still want to be known as independent. We'll see if that's true next time they run, or if they run again. I mean, who knows? That's not for 2 years. But so we kind of have 5 Republicans and then 2 Democrats and 2 independents who are somewhat in alignment with each other, that 4-member majority or minority. And so this past week we had 2 votes, and of course most things in the school board on the school board agenda, went through unanimously, as they usually do. When we talk about having a divided body, whether it's the school board or county commission or whatever, that doesn't mean that all of these bodies, most of what they vote on, they agree on, but it's where they have differences that it gets interesting. And so the 2 things they voted on this week was, first of all, they were talking about Superintendent John Ryswick's annual evaluation and kind of setting the metrics that they're going to use for that. And he won't be evaluated until January 2024. They're going to give him sort of a year and a half, get his feet under him and everything. They're not going to evaluate him immediately. But they came up with a multi-page document. You can find it online on the school board website, listing 15 performance objectives, and under those 15 performance objectives, a bunch of different bullet points. So, lots of different things they're going to look at. One of those bullet points, under the category of looking out for the mental health of students, was to look at disciplinary disparities between student groups. And this is something the school system has had a real focus on for the past 8 years. They've had a couple of sort of official bodies, first a task force and then something they called the Alliance for Equity, kind of tracking data both about student achievement but also about discipline, suspensions, expulsions, all of the different disciplinary measures that are taken in schools, and how those break down by racial groups and by socioeconomic groups, by students with disabilities, kind of all the different subcategories of students. And so Susan Horn, who, as I mentioned, part of the Republican majority, made the motion to take that specific bullet point out and to say, let's not judge the superintendent on whether or not we have disparities in discipline among racial groups and other groups of students. And her reasoning for this was that she's afraid that principals and then teachers may perceive pressure from if everybody knows the superintendent's being evaluated based on disciplinary numbers, there may be pressure down through the system to reduce those numbers however they can do it. And so, what Horn was saying was that it's possible that the way that trickles down to the classroom is teachers don't feel like they can take disciplinary measures when they need to because they know their principal is going to get mad at them if they write up a kid who they just wrote up last week and that kind of thing. Right. And so there was a whole discussion about it, and the pushback from sort of the minority side of the board, which includes its only racial minority member, Reverend Butler, was that, well, if we don't measure this, how are we going to know if it's getting better or not? We have set a priority as a school system that we want to reduce these disparities. And Horn's response was, well, we should still measure it. The system should still track it. That information should be available to people to look at. But we shouldn't use it to judge his performance because that's the thing that's going to create, potentially perverse incentives. And it was interesting, Jennifer Owen, who voted against taking this out, but she's a former teacher herself, and she did say that when she was a teacher, there were some times where she felt that pressure, where principals would, or, administrators would come in and kind of say, like, your numbers are too high. Bring them down. And she would say, well, there's reasons that the numbers are higher or whatever. It was like, well, that doesn't matter. Like, we just want those numbers to come down. So, on the one hand, you can see this as an argument about management and discipline and teachers having the ability, feeling like they have the ability to keep their classrooms in order. But on the other hand, given sort of the racial context of so much of our politics these days, when you have a new Republican majority come in and say, we don't want to measure racial disparity. We don't want, not measure, but we don't want to hold the superintendent accountable for racial disparities anymore. That could look like a deliberate effort to kind of downplay those disparities, downplay talking about race in general. And I think that was kind of where the minority was coming from.
Yeah, well, one thing is, collecting data is great, but, the typically in most organizations, somebody is held accountable for that, either, in a good way or a bad way, and for how that, the fluctuations in that data. Yeah, in this instance, there could be some, as you put it, perverse motivations, but it's also like, what are you going to do about it? And to your point again, you also mentioned that if there's not somebody accountable, and I'm not saying it should necessarily be Roswick, but if there's not somebody held accountable, then is it really going to come up in deliberations and conversations as much? I know one thing that I'll go way back to when I was covering the Kingston coal ash spill. Yeah, when I was at the News Center, one of the things, I went to D.C. for some of the hearings some congressional hearings they had, and one thing that was painfully obvious is TVA is not in the federal budget. It's got its own budget. It doesn't receive any taxpayer funding. And so as a consequence, TVA, since the late 90s when it was taken off the budget, had been completely ignored by Congress.
Right. There was no oversight.
There was no oversight because there was no money attached, so they didn't talk about TVA until an environmental disaster happened. And this is could have a similar thing in that there's no reason, if there's no reason to talk about disparities won't be talked about.
Well, and that's exactly what Daniel Watson, who voted against taking it out, said, that, he basically called it lip service. If we're going to measure this, but we're not going to do anything about it or with it, you might as well just be kind of checking the weather every day. It's not really going to have any particular impact. The argument on the flip side, and so I've talked to Ryswick a little bit since this meeting, and I'll have some more coverage next week about the broader issues of how he sees kind of equity within the school system. You could, on the other hand, argue that we've had an 8-year process, and there have been public meetings and public reports, and data has been presented, but nothing's gotten better. Yeah. And so, has that process itself actually been valuable beyond just kind of, it has certainly brought the information maybe more attention than it had before, and I think that was part of the goal. But if nothing has really changed as a result of it, has that process itself been valuable? And so we will have some more coverage of that next week. But so the upshot of this was that it was a 5-4 vote, and the 5-member Republican majority took that one bullet item out. That won't be in there. The other thing they voted on was membership in something called the Coalition of Large School Systems, CLASS, which has been made up of the 4 largest school systems in Tennessee, which is Knox County, Hamilton County, where Chattanooga is, Davidson, Metro Nashville, and Shelby County, Memphis. And this is a lobbying group, basically. They each chip in. For Knox County, it's been about $37,000 a year, so, a drop in the school budget. And they have been represented by a lobbying firm, Millsaps Gowan, during the state legislative sessions, basically to track any education bills, anything of interest specifically to the largest school systems in the state, because they have a lot of the same needs as the smaller school systems, but there are complexities and diversity that comes with those larger systems where their interests are sometimes a bit different. So again, that 5-member majority raised concerns both about the effectiveness of the lobbying firm. There were questions about, have we really been getting much for this? Jennifer Owen, the board member who works most closely with them, argued fairly vehemently that yes, this has been very valuable, and they have phone calls every week during the session where they run through every bill on the docket. They provide weekly, that basically they provide a ton of information to the school system about what's going on in the legislature that there's no way for them to track in that detail themselves. But also, the broader question that was raised was, is Knox County really aligned with these other large school systems? And nobody really said anything about Hamilton County. I don't think anybody particularly objected to Knox County and Knoxville being sort of in association with Chattanooga. The real issues seem to be Nashville and Memphis. And again, it's hard not to see some level of politics here, partisan politics, because Nashville and Memphis are the 2 largest school systems in the state, but they are also the 2 largest Democratic counties in the state. They're the most Democratic counties in the state. Mm-hmm. They both voted nearly 2/3 for Joe Biden in 2020. That's a little bit different than Knox County. And their school systems in particular have come under a lot of fire from the Republican supermajority in the state legislature. Those are the 2 districts that were singled out to have sort of a pilot program for vouchers, which basically no other school district wanted. And Memphis and Nashville didn't want them either, but the legislature said, too bad, you have to have them. There was a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court has allowed that program to go forward. And, Memphis and Nashville have been involved in a years-long lawsuit against the state, saying that the state underfunds their schools. There's a fairly contentious relationship between those 2 districts and the legislature. And so what Susan Horn said was that in talking to legislators in the Knox County delegation, who are mostly Republican, they felt like it would actually be to Knox County's advantage to not be lobbying alongside Memphis and Nashville, because Memphis and Nashville are kind of persona non grata for, and you can argue about whether that's for good, bad, or other reasons in the legislature, but it is the case. And so I think that the majority on the board felt more comfortable dropping that membership, and now they're going to have to turn around and probably hire their own lobbyist, because otherwise, they all agreed that they need to have a presence in Nashville. And this is something our other local governments do too. The city and the county, they have lobbyists because there's a lot that goes on in Nashville. Things happen during the legislative session very quickly, and if you don't have somebody on the ground there, it's just really hard to keep track of. But so that vote was also the same. The same 5 Republicans voted to leave CLASS, and then 3 of the others voted against it, and Reverend Butler abstained from that vote. But, just 2 votes that showed that this new board, there are some issues where they are a partisan board now, and there's issues where they're going to look partisan. And B, also, especially having a new superintendent on hand, they're willing to make changes. They're not going to necessarily feel bound by, we agreed to do this thing 10 years ago.
Yeah, and one thing that'll be interesting to follow is, if Knox County Schools does hire its own lobbyist, the lobbyist that they hire will be doing the exact same work that the lobbyist for class has been doing, except they won't be sharing the cost with 3 other systems. They'll be bearing it all on their own.
Yes.
And it'll be interesting to see what they end up paying for the new lobbyists will be. I doubt very seriously it'll be 4 times what they're paying now, but you never know.
Well, and it will be more. I think there was generally an understanding among them as they talked about it that yes, it will probably cost them a little bit more. I think the city of Knoxville pays its lobbyist in the $60,000 a year vicinity. Yeah. Knox County actually has its lobbying contract on County Commission's agenda this month, and I think it is $75,000 a year that they're paying to a lobbyist. So yeah, I think the school system could, but again, that 37,000 was a tiny. Nobody was protesting this as something they couldn't afford. It was more about are these the friends we want to have? I think was really that conversation.
Even if they did quadruple the fee, it's still a drop in the bucket in the school system's overall budget.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot to us as just regular ordinary citizens, but it's almost irrelevant.
Right. When you're spending $600 million a year, a couple tens of thousands of dollars, not that big a deal. But so yes, we will certainly follow up on that, who they hire. Yeah. Another interesting discussion this week, also revolving around the state legislature and some of their actions, happened at the University of Tennessee. What happened there?
Yes. On Monday and Tuesday, there was a 2-day teach-in protest, I guess you could call it, over the state's newly enacted divisive concepts bill. This is a bill that's passed in this year's legislative session that lists 16 divisive concepts. These are all concepts revolving around race and class and gender, and it's basically, if you teach these things, you better be careful.
And I just want to say real quickly, this phrase, divisive concepts, the fact that we have a legal category of divisive concepts in Tennessee right now, I know the word Orwellian gets used a lot, or maybe you want to call it Maoist even, but this idea that the state has identified concepts, ideas essentially, that are illegal to be discussed in a state university, I still find kind of fascinating.
Well, the law is written in a funny way. It's not real clear, for one thing, and it's not that they take great pains to say, you can still talk about these concepts, but where the rubber meets the road is if any student or staff member is required to believe in these concepts or follow these concepts against their will, they can sue. Mm-hmm. They can sue the school and the instructor, and that you sit there and think, well, what do you mean by that? Well, if you're going to be punished for this, and what is punishment? Is it a bad grade? What is it? It's not spelled out. It's hard to identify. That has been brought up by people in the university. But what it has is a chilling effect on teaching those concepts. If you want to talk about,
and these are mostly concepts revolving around race, gender, the history of sort of power differentials in our society, and so forth.
Yeah, so if you've got a class and you're talking about gender inequities or or you want to talk about race, teach racism, you've got to, history classes, American history classes have to teach racism. It's, huge part of our history. Well, is there going to be, these professors could have some trepidation about raising these topics and how they talk about them anyway. So the United Campus Workers, which includes some members, our faculty members, organized a protest Monday and Tuesday. Where about 30 professors deliberately taught the divisive concepts. They read a statement at the beginning of class. They basically said, I'm about to break this law because we are going to talk about this. And it was a variety of disciplines, and so they did that. They also had a panel discussion on Monday night about it. I went to that. There was a lot of this talk about it. One of the panelists was a political science professor. Talked about how vague the law was and how almost unenforceable it is. But the very fact that the law is there, and they talked about ways that professors might try to make sure they don't get sued over this. And one of the things they talked about was just telling students, if you don't agree with evolution, you can walk out of the evolutionary biology class session on it. And you don't have to listen to it.
And to be clear, evolution is not incled in this, right?
No.
They can still teach evolution.
They can still teach evolution.
We're not quite back to 1925 yet.
No, but a lot of the professors think we're headed there in a hurry. Another tactic could possibly be that, for instance, on a test, if there's a question about a divisive concept, that professors can mark it right or wrong, but they don't include it it doesn't count toward the final, the grade it's given. So, there's just a lot of uncertainty about what they can and cannot say. And the fear that professors have is that they're going to they're going to say the wrong thing. Or they're going to present their materials the wrong way. UT administration says that they don't think the bill is really impinges on academic freedom, and professors are, there were some at the panel discussion who were like, well, technically, yeah, it may not, but if it has the chilling effect, you might as well. You might as well outlaw talking about them if I'm so afraid that I'm going to get sued over this and have to go through the expense of defending myself in a lawsuit and that sort of thing. What's the upside for me? I'll just skip it.
And as far as we know, nobody suffered any repercussions from this teach-in, and the official response from the university was kind of, that's all fine. This isn't, what they're doing isn't against the law, so it's not a big deal. But as you say, that would really be up to a student to decide, well, I feel like I was required to somehow agree to these concepts, and therefore I'm going to file a lawsuit. And I do think that it's like with a lot of these private cause of action bills that I feel like we're seeing more of these days. The state is kind of, it's a little bit of an end run around, for example, if they just passed a bill that said, we're going to come and arrest you for teaching these concepts, you would have a pretty strong First Amendment case against that. But it doesn't envision criminal penalties. It envisions civil recourses from private citizens, and the law doesn't even come into effect unless and until somebody files that suit. And so, you kind of don't even know where the line is.
Yeah, and one of the topics that came up during the panel discussion was, well, individual students, they're scraping together their money to buy pizzas. They're not going to sue. But one of the issues was, well, there are political groups who could recruit students to sue, and that was in fact one of the one of the professors in the roundtable said panel discussion said that's probably the tactic we'll see if we see anything like
where
this.
It would come from. Maybe they would hear that some professor is talking about stuff they don't like, and they would try to find somebody in maybe a college Republican who's in the class or something, and then file suit on their behalf.
Yeah.
Well, so again, just an interesting thing we'll keep an eye on and see what kind of
the school year just started.
Right.
So you mentioned that there haven't been any repercussions. Well, one of the things that was brought up in the panel discussions is that there are staff members who have changed how they're presenting material. Some of them, and staff members who have employees,
right?
Because it's not just in the classroom; it's anywhere. Have already altered how they talk about diversity in the workplace and things like that. So that's already happening. But the academic year is young, and I'm sure that we're going to keep an eye on things to see if there are any problems that arise out of this.
Right. Okay. Well, also this past week, there was some news on the planning front. Knox County has a planning process called Advance Knox going on right now. You can read all about it both on our website at compassknox.com and at the Advance Knox website at advanceknox.org. And this is basically an update of the county's general plan, the first time they've done a comprehensive planning update in just about 20 years. And it's about a year-and-a-half process they're going through. They're kind of halfway through it now. And what has happened this past week, and really all this month, is they have presented some scenarios for future growth and development in the county, sort of different paths it could take with different levels of regulation, different kinds of regulation from the county. And we're only talking about the areas of the county outside the city of Knoxville and Farragut, the unincorporated county. Mm-hmm. And that information is on the website there, and they're soliciting feedback. There were public meetings this past week, but also they're accepting feedback online on that website all month. And we talked to Jim Snowden, the Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works at Knox County, who is kind of overseeing this effort from the county's side. And let's go to that interview. He tells us about the background of this, what they're trying to do, and kind of where it's all headed. Our guest this week for our podcast interview is Jim Snowden, the Senior Director of Engineering and Public Works for Knox County Government. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Be glad to be here, Scott and Jesse.
So we have asked you here today to talk to us about Advance Knox, which is a countywide, well, I say countywide, I guess this really, we're just talking about the unincorporated parts of the county, so the county outside city of Knoxville and Farragut, but it's an update of the general plan for the county and also of your transportation planning. And obviously there's been, we've kind of been in a second phase of it this past week. But before we talk about that, for people who haven't been following this at every step, tell us a little bit about what you all are trying to do here.
Sure, glad to. As anybody has, lived in our community for the last 5 or 6 years, have seen just really extreme growth in the residential areas. A lot of people trying to, Knox County and Tennessee is an attractive place to live. A lot of people are moving here, and that's putting a lot of stress on not only our infrastructure, public infrastructure, but the private infrastructure in the home building market. So that's one of the things that Mayor Jacobs identified and really said, hey, this, if anybody's been to a zoning meeting in the last, couple of years, they see those things are, they can be pretty contentious, and the mayor wants to try to make that process more objective. So he had tasked us and my department and Knox County Planning with updating our general plan. Our general plan, I think it's dated 2003, so it's right at 20 years old. Obviously, that's, ancient in the terms of land use. Our zoning ordinance is even older, but we're working on that. We'll work on that next fiscal year. But the mayor wants us to update this land use plan. We started that last year, selected consultant, Kimley Horn, and they're, I won't say midway through that process to actually do, to update the general plan. As part of that plan that we've never had before is a comprehensive comprehensive transportation plan. And, in the past, we've kind of had those two things, the land use over here and the transportation's over here. And that kind of creates some of the problems that we're having today, because the two aren't aligned with each other. So we were really, intentional about that, whatever land use decisions we make long term, we need to make sure that the infrastructure, roadway infrastructure and, and stormwater infrastructure is accommodating for that development. So, it's really, really exciting to think those two things are going to come together and mesh. And to your point, this does not include the town of Farragut or the city of Knoxville. However, they are on the technical advisory committees, and we're keeping them very closely in tune with the process. But the plan itself will only, regulate land use and transportation improvements in Knox County proper.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how important is the general plan? Because it's basically it's the big picture vision, right? It's not actually setting specific regulations or zoning designations or whatever. So can you just kind of talk about the value that it provides?
Sure. It is the foundation that everything sits on. If you think of it like a home or whatever, the general plan sits here, and then, your sector plans and all your other ordinances rest on top of that. So, if you don't get it right, or if it's broken, everything else kind of, starts to settle into place. So really, it's something that, when we talk to the consultants and the folks at planning, they said, really, to start the process, you got to get that firm foundation built first, establish what areas are rural, what areas are, need to grow, and what areas are already grown in the sense of that they're urban. So that's what we want to do, and, and really move this process forward, hopefully over the next 6 to 9 months for actual execution.
What are some of the issues that are coming up? I know one particular thing is density in certain areas. Where there might be commercial density, for example, and also residential density. Especially in parts of North Knox County and East Knox County that have traditionally not been very dense. They're much more rural. So address some of those issues that are coming up and what you're hearing from people.
Sure. And I think that goes back to that age of that plan, Scott, is, what in that old plan shows as really rural residential or rural commercial. Because it's 20 years old, it's really not rural anymore. It's grown to the point that it is urban, although it's classified in the old plan as a rural setting, and that's created this, I think, division and folks in the community being concerned. So that's part of the reason we want to set these new locations to where density is appropriate. Right now, everybody's trying to put density everywhere. We want to put that density where it makes sense, where the infrastructure is there, where it's cost effective for the county taxpayer to support that density. Whereas, if we put it out, just randomly without a plan, all the county's going to end up doing is spending more money to support that population as it grows out into those areas. And so I think that the plan will certainly address a lot of that and assign where those higher density nodes are appropriate.
Well, and so to that point, this past week has been what you all called Choices Week. I guess back in the spring, you had Ideas Week, where you had public meetings and people could come out and also go online and kind of give their big picture ideas about what they'd like to see or not like to see in the county. And now this past week, you actually presented 3 different scenarios, which I think people can go to the website, right, at advanceknox.org and see those scenarios. But can you just briefly talk through what those 3 scenarios that you presented for feedback are?
Sure, be glad to. And we had 3 public meetings since Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of this week. We had a virtual meeting today that was well attended, had 120 folks in it.
Wow.
So we were super excited about that, and got a lot of good feedback about these choices that we're offering the community. The 3 that we came up with, and these choices. To your point, this is a second round of engagement. The first round was ideas. So we took all that data that we got from ideas, as well as, the comments we've got from legislatures and mayor and, just everybody, and kind of formulated these scenarios. In addition to working with our fiscal consultant. There's a fiscal consultant that's on this team for Kimley Horn, because one of the mayor's things is he obviously, he wants to be very fiscally, responsible, make sure that we're using the taxpayers' resources as wisely as we possibly can. So essentially, we formulated, based on all that information, 3 scenarios. And one of those is outward bound. And outward bound, really, to kind of put it really simply, is status quo. That's, residential being, growing out in the rural area, and, commercial and employment centers along major corridors, kind of strict commercial. And then we looked at,
would it be fair to say that that's kind of the sprawl model?
I think it's fair. That's what that's what we've kind of heard from the community, and it does sprawl out because you're putting 3 and 4, 5 dwelling units an acre in areas, so you're not able to really compress that density, so to speak. So the other scenario is the Willie Nelson on the road again, and we chose that because it's one of the things that we want to do to be fiscally responsible is, how can we minimize and really make sure that the infrastructure is adequate? Well, we can put those higher density commercial and residential nodes along these major corridors, like Maynardville Highway, Shawd Road, the ones that either are built or going to be built. And then the last one we chose was Town and Country. And that's one that you kind of think of as really town center. Kind of like, I think the board, we had represented pictures of ones in Franklin and, the one at North Shore Town Center, where you have some mixed uses. You may have commercial on the bottom floor and residential uses above, to where it's more walkable. That's one of the things we heard a lot of is, people want to be able to walk or certainly drive a smaller distance to get the essential services that they have, rather than that, to your point, Jesse, the sprawl model. So we've kind of, presented all 3 of those to the community, and didn't really necessarily ask them to vote on it. Maybe put it more in a sense of, do you like it or dislike it? And do you like it or dislike it strongly? Because we understand, if you have a vote, it's a litmus test. It's black or white. So we wanted to have a little more leeway there, and have received some really good feedback about all 3 proposals.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Scott.
One thing about the town and country model that you're talking about is that almost encourages the development of small towns, as
Yes.
it were. Not incorporated, but for instance, Gibbs, the Harbison's Crossroads and Gibbs would be one that is where you could have the higher density development around the crossroads, where there would be commercial development and a little, maybe next to that, a little higher density residential development, and it would actually turn into almost a small town, much more like Halls than it is currently.
Yes.
But that would also decrease the pressure on development density, at least decrease the density in developments that are a mile or 2 away from the crossroads. Is that where you got kind of the idea?
You said it better than I did, Scott. That's exactly what we're shooting for. And Harbison's Crossroads, is a good location. Tazewell Pike at Emory, the Gibbs community, there's several of those major state highways that cross that have already kind of served a little bit of that role. And that is something that, and to be honest with you, the feedback that we've seen so far, obviously we've got, the whole month of October is the choices month. So folks are going to have, another 30 days to comment on, and the people will be able to do everything that we've done on the online and in-person meetings on advanceknox.org. So we want to make sure we got all that. But the early projections at what I saw was that, pretty much Town and Country was kind of the preferred scenario. So certainly want to encourage people to continue to input that, but that was the one that we saw. Just the dots on the board, real representative visual analysis showed that Town and Country was the preferred scenario at this point.
Well, and that does seem to be a model that kind of addresses, on the one hand, this concern about preserving some of our undeveloped rural land, or having it developed at a lower, more traditional density, I guess, but that people who live in places like that could still have some place, like in Gibbs, for example, within a few miles where they could go and have access to all these amenities. Because I know right now in a lot of parts of the county where it's just been sort of like one subdivision after another, a lot of those people have to drive a long way to get to a store, or a restaurant, or a gas station, or whatever, right?
Yep, I got an email, our advanceknox.org. We have a general email, and it's funny you say that. The lady emailed today, and I can't recall where exactly her address was, but she said, there's no grocery stores near me, and she's got to drive a long distance, and get into a busier road with a lot more traffic, and so that is exactly one of the things that we're trying to fix with that, and I think it's a really good model. So it was kind of interesting. That was kind of at least the initial preferred solution.
So one of the other things there is it's kind of most people associate the term food desert with urban areas, but there are food deserts in some of the more rural areas of Knox County and other counties as well. So.
That's true. That we did a meeting in a box, and that's one thing that we will talk about. That if anybody that's watching this has a community group, or a group of business leaders or professionals, whatever, we have what was called a meeting in a box, and we'll come out with our staff. And we did one yesterday with Boys and Girls Club, and come out and more or less do this exact thing. And that's to your point, Scott. We did one with the Food Policy Council. And they mentioned food deserts, and it's the first time I'd ever heard that. So but they really exist, and that's one of the things that this plan is hopefully going to help with some of those issues. So.
And so people can find out about this and also give input at advanceknox.org. And also, is there information there where they can contact you if they want to invite you to come out?
Yes, sir. We've got a lot of comments for folks. Gentleman from Hardin Valley the other day wanted us to come out, and we'll do that. We're going tomorrow, and the rest of the week we're going to be in all the senior centers doing that exact same exercise because this isn't our plan. This is the community's plan, and that's what we want, as many folks to have a voice in that as possible. So we encourage everybody to get involved.
And real quick, what's the timeline after this? What happens next?
We'll compile all these comments, and obviously we want to be very transparent in that process. So we'll get everything that we heard and seen at these meetings up on the website so that people can start digesting that within the next probably month. And then we hope to have a preferred scenario that's probably going to be a blend, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of this. It's not going to be necessarily one at the exact town center, the exact on the road again. Probably by early next year, and then most likely potentially taking that in front of the legislative bodies spring to summer of next year is kind of the thought. We obviously we don't want to rush it, but we'll make sure it's right. But we want to be apparent, be diligent to make sure it gets done as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, thanks very much for giving us an update, and certainly we will be checking back in with you as this all moves along.
Well, I appreciate you guys. You guys are always great to talk to.
Thanks again to Jim for talking with us. And again, if you have not participated in any of the Advance Knox meetings to this point, feel free to check out the website at advanceknox.org and give your feedback, because this is all going to come to, some final proposals and decisions next year. So now is the time to get your thoughts in there. So now we are to the question and answer portion of the podcast. Every week we ask our subscribers on our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, available to subscribers of Compass at compassknox.com. And we ask them, is there anything, you want to hear about on the podcast this week that may go beyond just the news of the day, news of the week? And we got some responses this week, and one of them had to do with property tax bills, and there's a reason for this, which is that, as you will know if you're a property owner or business owner in Knoxville and Knox County, property tax bills have gone out. We have received our property tax bills for 2022. You have, I think, through February, I believe, to pay those. Don't take our word for it, of course, but you have several months anyway.
Well, mine gets paid through escrow.
Right,
so.
mine does. Mine does as well.
So my bank better keep, they better keep track of it.
Right, so. It's up to them. But of course, we just had a countywide reappraisal where property values went up an average of 40% across the county, although there's a lot of variation in that. And then we also had a tax increase from the city of Knoxville. And then the city and the county both had to lower their tax rates because of that increase in the countywide appraisal. So now everybody's finally getting to see what this actually means, like what you have to pay. And one of the questions from one of our readers who said she lives in a modest home, in a neighborhood of modest homes, her appraisal went up tremendously, as did many of her neighbors, and her bill is up about 40%. And she was basically saying, why is this so high? And the city tax increase was about a 20% increase in their rate.
Yeah, once it all settled out and the equalization kicked in and the dust settled, it was about 20%.
So why might somebody see a 40% increase if the tax rate only went up by 20%?
Well, that's if their reappraisal was above. At least above 40%, which was the countywide average, then your bill's going to go up. I mean, that's your house. The good news part of that is your house is worth more. Your wealth has increased. The bad news is you got to pay higher property taxes on it, and that's where that's come in. And so, even if someone's reappraisal had come in above around 40%, and there had been no tax increase, they still would be paying more in property taxes this year.
For the city.
For the city.
Yeah.
Well, actually in the county too. I mean, of course, that was status quo in the county because they didn't raise taxes.
Right.
But if your property increased in value above the countywide average, you're paying more in property taxes this year in raw dollars than you did last year. So.
Yep. And so it can seem sort of mysterious and maybe unfair to people if you're kind of looking at, because all of this is public record. We can say you can go online and see what any property in the county is valued at. And if you see that yours went up 75% and your neighbors only went up 25% and your bill's up and their bill's down, that can seem very unfair. But all of that comes back to those individual property appraisals by the assessor's office. They have formulas for it. I'm not going to pretend that I understand all those formulas. They say that, they look at local market conditions, sales in the area, so on and so forth, any improvements that have been made to the specific property. But it can still feel a little bit like a roulette, and some people's go up and some people's go down and some stay the same.
It's mysterious. It's like it's like selecting the Vatican selecting a pope.
Right.
The College of Cardinals, and you don't know till the smoke changes color.
Or until that property tax bill shows up.
Or the property tax bill shows up. And one of the things is the question that came in too was, this person lived in the city, and I said, "Well, what's my money going toward?" Well, and that's a fair question, because you had this property tax increase, and on top of the reappraisal, but the city's property tax increase primarily is funding an overhaul of the compensation of city employees, particularly police officers and firefighters.
Right.
And so they completely rebuilt the compensation structure. Almost everybody in the city got their pay increased. So to be more competitive with other cities and the private sector here. And so, and then there's some other built-in inflation things for the next few years. They're hoping that that this will last a few years. They're pretty much guaranteeing as much as you do in government, about 3 years, but it could last longer. And because that all depends on what happens in the future. I mean, one of the things that came out this week was the local option sales tax income in the city of Knoxville increased by 20% over projections.
Right.
So they budgeted at $47 million, and they actually took in $56.9 million, and so they were able to do more there, and so and that can change in the future as well. The property tax rate, however, will probably stay exactly where it is, at least for a couple of years.
Sure. All right. Well, and of course, as you say, police and fire make up the biggest part of the city budget. And so if anybody wants to know what your city taxes pay for, the first thing you're paying for is police and fire, because those are the two biggest departments in the city, and they're the most expensive ones. And then everything else the city does, Parks and Rec and so forth. But the easiest way to think of it is most of your taxes are going to pay for public safety.
That's correct.
For. Okay, looking ahead to this coming week, actually there's not a lot going on sort of on the civic front, I think because it is fall break week for Knox County schools, and a lot of our local institutions try to not schedule meetings, public events, and so forth during that week because a lot of people go out of town. So we don't have a lot on the calendar coming up, but you do have a story you're working on that you can preview a little bit.
Yeah, we talked to Jim Snowden about Advance Knox is another change in the development front. There's going to be some reshuffling of chairs, positions from Knox County Planning, and the upshot is that this planning staff will be divided, with roughly half going to work for the county and the other half roughly going to work for the city. I'm going to have a story about that and its possible reasons and outcomes and that sort of thing. It's a long-term thing. Nothing's gonna really happen until the next fiscal year, which begins July 1st of 2024. But the city and the county are both laying the groundwork for it. One of the things the city did is they moved a position into the mayor's office as a special assistant to get ready to create a new zoning department. So we're going to talk about that and report on that this coming week.
And I'm sure we will discuss it on next week's podcast.
We can, yes.
And we will also have a lot of election coverage in this coming week because early voting starts a week from Wednesday on October 19th. And we will have stories on our we've already written about some of them, but on the competitive races that we have mostly for the state legislature and for Congress. So all of that will be coming up at CompassKnox.com for our subscribers. And so here we are at the end of the podcast. I should say thanks as always to our producer, Lord Seth Barber, Barbarian Studios. Barbarian Studios or Barbarian Productions? What do you go with?
I mean, the company is Productions.
Productions, Barbarian Productions. Okay. And thanks to Will Wright, who wrote our theme music. And I was talking about this last week after we ended the show. I feel like we need a tagline here at the end. We always get to the end and it's kind of like, all right, see you next week. I don't have one. I didn't spend this week thinking about it. I'm going to throw it out to the listeners. What should we say at the end of the podcast? You know, like Casey Kasem at the end of Top 40, he would always say, what was it? Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars, something like that. We want something like that, but like Knoxville specific, Knox County specific, Appalachian specific. I don't know. Give us some ideas. What should our sign off be? If you have thoughts about that, feel free to jump on the Compass Facebook page or write us at info@CompassKnox.com. And We will see you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.